Hello and welcome to the LLG Grapevine podcast. You're listening to Helen Bennett, LLG's Executive Director of Policy and Governance, and Dennis Hall, LLG Bulletin Editor.
Hi, everyone.
Now, the Labour government have launched over 20 consultations and working papers since it won the election, and some of them make big changes for the local government legal landscape, including planning, housing and infrastructure, not to mention structural reform and governance. The last Conservative government managed 15 in its first 6 months under Rishi Sunak, but Labour's agenda appears to have far more impact upon our sector and certainly will require our members to be agile and proactive as they support their council with the changes. And we have just learned proposals for yet another consultation soon to be launched. Dennis.
Yes, Helen. And my first item concerns this unexpected government announcement of its proposals to tackle cybercrime and specifically ransomware demands. Our sector is familiar with this highly disruptive phenomenon, with the numerous examples in our sector of councils who have faced demands for hundreds of thousands of pounds, the wholesale disruption of key services, and the huge costs associated with remediation. UK businesses and the public sector are set to be protected by new world-leading ransomware proposals to tackle the threat of cybercrime, which is estimated to cost the UK economy billions of pounds every year. The Home Office has announced a consultation on 3 proposals. First, a targeted ban on ransomware payments for all public sector bodies and critical national infrastructure, expanding the existing ban on ransomware payments by government departments and making essential services that the country relies upon the most unattractive targets for ransomware crime. And second, a ransomware payment prevention regime, thus increasing the National Crime Agency's awareness of live attacks and criminal ransom demands, providing victims with advice and guidance before they decide how to respond, and enabling payments to known criminal groups to be blocked. And third, a mandatory reporting regime for ransomware incidents, bringing ransomware out of the shadows and maximising the intelligence used by UK law enforcement agencies to warn of emerging ransomware threats. Now, the National Cyber Security Centre managed 430 cyber incidents between September 2023 and August 2024, including 13 ransomware incidents which were deemed to be nationally significant and posed serious harm to essential services or the wider community. Has your council been the victim of cyber attacks? What do you think of these new proposals? Let us know on the LLG's forum page. Helen.
Well, cybersecurity must surely be even more of a concern now due to the advent of artificial intelligence. If you can code, the ability to influence AI must be significant, but there are vast opportunities also. And the Prime Minister last week made a speech on his AI Opportunities Action Plan, within which he said AI could be a chance to turbocharge growth, create the companies of the future, and radically improve our public services. And illustrating where he thought AI could help local authorities, Keir Starmer said that AI can save hundreds of thousands of hours lost to miss appointments because it can identify those on the list most likely not to turn up. That's an interesting one. It can spot potholes quicker, speed up planning applications, reduce form filling, and almost half the time social workers spend on paperwork. Now, arguing that AI will give more time back to staff for the personal touch and connection, he even went so far as to state AI would make public services more human and reconnect staff with the reasons they came to public service in the first place. He referred to AI as the defining opportunity of our generation, and there was also an announcement for £14 billion worth of investment in new data centres, thousands of AI jobs to be created, and plans for a UK-based supercomputer. Now, the irony of his ambitious speech, however, was not lost on newspaper The Independent, who pointed out his Wi-Fi was going in and out during the speech. As with all things technologically based, the potential for things to go wrong always exists. But then the human potential to go wrong always exists too. And all too aware of things going wrong, the lawyers are worrying about the lack of regulation in the sector. So the Law Gazette, reporting on the speech, reported that their president, Richard Atkinson, he stated that increasing regulatory capabilities and providing legal certainty through responsible AI regulation was needed. Of course, the EU are further ahead on this, but they have been criticised for being too restrictive. It also reported, the Gazette that is, that lawyers have pointed out that establishing a UK regulatory regime might not be simple, and that balancing consumer protection, copyright protection, and technical logical innovation needs to happen quickly. Now, in other news, the subject of another consultation, compulsory purchase orders. Dennis.
Indeed. The law governing compulsory purchase is fragmented and inaccessible, the Law Commission has declared, as it seeks views on how to simplify, consolidate and modernise legislation. Compulsory purchase, of course, is the acquisition of land for the public good without the owner's consent. It can be carried out only with statutory authority, and the owner must be compensated. Now, the Commission reviewed compulsory purchase laws 2 decades ago, but the government opted against replacing the existing legislative framework due to the required resources and risk of unintended consequences. However, the Commission, which was asked by the last government to look at compulsory purchase again, said piecemeal changes to the law have made it even more complicated and fragmented than it was 2 decades ago. Since the last review, the Planning and Compulsory Purchase Act 2004, the Localism Act 2011, the Growth and Infrastructure Act 2013, the Housing and Planning Act 2016, the Neighbourhood Planning Act 2017, and before I draw breath, finally, the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act 2023 have all been introduced. In the latest consultation, the Commission is seeking views on issues such as the terminology, challenging the validity of a compulsory purchase order, a single unified procedure, technical issues, completion costs, counter notices and compensation. Public Law Commissioner Professor Alison Young said, compulsory purchase is an important means through which to deliver infrastructure and development projects. However, the law is complex and inaccessible. It is important to ensure that the law is clear and up to date. We would encourage anyone who has knowledge or experience in this area to give us their views on our questions and provisional proposals. The consultation closes on the 31st of March. Recent government announcements, of course, have made it absolutely clear that large-scale planning schemes and infrastructure projects are to be expected in their plans for growth, so this is indeed a timely review. Let us know what changes you would like to see in this important area of practice for local authorities. Helen.
Well, another step in the planning and housing landscape saw a return last week of the government's landmark Renters' Rights Bill in the Commons, which is now at report stage. So the government's further amendments at this time include provisions to restrict the payment of rent in advance, limit a guarantor's liability for rent following the death of a tenant, and introduce a new ground for possession of alternative accommodation provided during redevelopment. So the bill implements commitments which came from Labour's party manifesto in 2024 to reform the regulation of the private rented sector, and it's intended to give greater rights and protections to people renting their homes, including abolishing Section 21 no-fault evictions and reforming grounds for possession. Now, most of the bill's provisions apply only to England, not to Wales. So in a press release, presumably, I think to allay fears by landlords, the government said that landlords can still be confident that tenants will be able to sustain their tenancy agreements with the ability to request 1 month's rent in advance alongside a security deposit of up to 5 or 6 weeks' rent. Deputy Prime Minister and Secretary of State for Housing, Angela Rayner, said, and I quote, "For far too long, working people and families have been at the mercy of a fickle and unfair rental market. faced with outrageous upfront costs and struggling to find a safe and secure place they can truly call home. So what other provisions within the bill do we have? Well, these include safeguards for bereaved guarantors, who are often family members, from being forced to pay rent for the rest of the tenancy where a loved one has died. A new rule to protect students, which will stop tenants from feeling pressurised to sign a lease for a new house so early into an academic year, discouraging landlords from pressurising students into their early commitments. And students will no longer be locked into an agreement more than 6 months in advance of moving in. Closing potential loopholes in rent repayment orders, ensuring superior landlords can be liable for RROs if an offence has been committed, even if the rent was not paid directly to them, but through an agent or intermediate landlord. Fees paid by landlords will directly fund the creation and work of the private rented sector ombudsman, providing renters and landlords with access to an effective and fair dispute resolution service. Now, for all the detail on the bill, the House of Commons Library, as always, has a detailed paper on the subject, which is linked through Bulletin 2. Now then, Dennis, it's easy to forget that OFLOG is no more, or maybe for some, that it ever existed in the first place. But what are the plans to plug the gap on oversight? Do we have any?
Well, Helen, that is the key question. But as you say, OFLOG is no more. It arrived, then left without a murmur and without anyone understanding what it was really about. And now, if you don't know what it was about, now you don't really need to know. But what comes next? The Housing, Communities and Local Government Committee has asked the government to provide information on its plans for its proposed new oversight organisation set to replace the Office for Local Government, OFLOG. The Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government announced the closure of OFLOG last month, citing concerns about the body's vague and broad remit and resourcing. The government now plans to establish a new body to oversee local audit called the Local Audit Office, or LAO. A consultation on the proposed LAO and on reforms to the local audit system is currently underway. Writing in a letter to the Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government, Angela Rayner, the committee's chair, Florence Ishalomi MP, said the committee welcomed the move. However, Ishalomi said that the committee does not believe that closing OFLOG alone will be enough to fix the issues in the local government audit system in England. And she added, "We would therefore like clarification and assurance from the department about the steps being taken to address the significant challenges local government audit is facing. In particular, we would appreciate clarification," she said, "on how the new local audit office will work to improve the situation and how it will ensure that lessons are learned from the experience of the former Audit Commission." Ishalomi also asked the Ministry to explain how the LAO will work to ensure that the production, content and format of local authority accounts is aligned with the purposes of those accounts, once these have been agreed upon following consultation. And she also raised questions about the future of the Financial Reporting Council and other bodies involved in the local audit system, now that the LAO will assume system leadership. Now, it remains to be seen what will happen here. A new audit commission, perhaps? Well, we'll just have to wait and see. Helen.
Well, the government are keen for it not to be the Audit Commission by any other name, so let's see what happens there. Now, I'm going to take us back to planning and some other reforms, with the Deputy Prime Minister, Angela Rayner, stating that the Planning and Infrastructure Bill announced in the King's Speech back in July is expected now to be introduced in March. Taken from the LGA Bulletin, Angela Rayner recently faced scrutiny from the Housing, Communities and Local Government Select Committee in the House of Commons. The Deputy Prime Minister outlined the government's priorities for addressing the housing crisis, focusing on providing homes as living spaces rather than financial assets that often sit empty. Now, she announced plans to amend the previous government's leasehold reform legislation and encourage local authorities to prioritise building affordable housing over reliance on costly temporary accommodation. Support by the recently announced increased real terms funding, including 233 million for homelessness and rough sleeping prevention programs. And Ms. Rayner set out the government's plan to deliver 1.5 million homes by the end of the Parliament, supported by reforms to the planning system to unlock new sites, 300 new planning officers, and a planning and infrastructure bill, as I've mentioned, to integrate essential infrastructure with housing developments. She also highlighted the need to strengthen the social care sector through increased funding, career development frameworks, and the Fair Pay Agreement, and emphasised the need for early intervention to prevent people reaching the point of crisis, and more collaborative support for children with special education needs. And throughout the session, reiterated her department's commitment to meaningful devolution, cross-authority collaboration, and revitalising high streets, ensuring housing is accessible, sustainable, and recognises local needs. So, a very ambitious agenda. And on that note, that's it for another edition of the podcast. You can read more on these items and many more besides by going to bulletin number 2, available on the LLG website now. So it's goodbye from me.
And from me too. Bye now.